What up?
RT Trosset. How are you, dog?
I'm good, man. Long time.
I didn't see you on the falling tide a couple of weeks ago.
Nope, I haven't been over there too much.
Yeah, because there's probably no fish in there.
No fish, no people to take, really. So.
Yeah. So what has the season been like for you with the COVID 2020?
COVID 2020. Well, it started off, we're enjoying our time fishing alone. I mean, we've had a great year of fishing, but we just haven't made any money doing it. So when they shut the hotels down, we lost, all our business.
Right.
Sneak out a few locals here and there, but
obviously you're glad to have the keys back open.
We are glad to have them back open.
Yeah.
Come on down fishing.
Well, the last time I saw you was in the winter. We were out riding mechanical bulls. I think you went over the head of a bull, and I pulled my hamstring chasing a chicken yesterday. So I guess we might be getting a little too old for all this nonsense.
We're getting a little too old for that, yeah. I should have never been riding that bull.
No,
not at my age.
Yeah. Have you always been that kind of a person where you just want to chase life and kind of be wrestling with life, if you will?
Yeah, I've always been the earliest to get up. I get up early in the morning and just can't wait to see what the new day has to develop. So many times, just sleep in, and I said, no, we got to get up and
get going.
I've
known you for a long time. We did a couple TV shows together. I don't know, maybe 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But every time I've been with you, you've been just so effervescent and happy and fun. And you have a lot of guides on the water that are so serious out there. And Pat Ford, some of the others that you fished with, I say, what's the great, and your son too, Chris. I said, what's the greatest thing about your dad? And everybody says he's so much fun.
Well, it's good to know. So
where do you hide the seriousness?
I don't take too many things too serious, really. I think the lucky thing is being able to do your job, do a job that you really love. And I was fortunate enough to get involved in fishing early enough. And that's all I've ever done is guided.
But too, I know there are a lot of guides that do what they do well. And then there are others that really take it to the extreme, like all their tackle is perfect. Their boat is perfect. Are you that guy?
Not quite. My tackle is usually perfect, but I'll get in and we won't wash the boat some nights, and it's just it gets overwhelming at times.
Right. Yeah, the guy that I was referring to is Mark Croca. He's off the water and home by 2 p.m. and asleep by 7 p.m. So he's got time to wash his boat.
When you get up that early, I guess you got to be. You got to do that.
Yeah, you get tired. Let's go back to your childhood, if you don't mind. Have you always been a fisherman? What was your dad? What kind of inspiration was he to you in this element?
Well, my dad, in all the elements of sporting stuff, my dad owned a boat dealership, and my grandfather also built boats, fleet-wing boats, back in the early 60s, and he built one of the very first fiberglass boats ever built. So I've always been around, and then my dad had a retail business. And I've always been around boats, and he would drag me anywhere I wanted to go. If he went hunting, I got to go hunting. If he went fishing, he would always bring the kids along. And so I got brought up in that environment, and it was a great way to grow up, and he was a great inspiration in that manner.
And you're still a hunter, obviously.
Yes, I am.
How does that weigh out in your passion?
Right. I still love my fishing. I mean, that's what I do, and I love to do the most. But I like to get involved in what I do, so I get ingrained in it. So in August, I'll leave Key West, and I'll be back in December, and I'm going to just hunt my way across the Midwest and out west. And
so tell me a little bit about where you go and how you hunt and what are you chasing?
All right. So I really love to chase whitetail deer. I love to sit in a tree stand and hunt those. So I'm going to Missouri, where we were fortunate enough to buy some property 3 years ago. I've got a couple 250 acres out there. I'm going to go to Kansas. We leased a bunch of property there. I've been drawing for this Iowa tag this is my 5th year, and I'm in the draw now. I'll find out any day if I draw that, but I'm supposedly, with all the odds and the points and everything, I'll get it this year. Then I go to Illinois for a little while, for a week, and I'll be in 2 weeks in New Mexico, Raton, New Mexico.
What's more exciting, to see a big whitetail come into the stand or a specific fish out in the ocean, like a big swordfish or tailing sailfish or whatever?
Well, nowadays I think the whitetail gets me pretty excited if it's a big one. You know, you
Right.
don't get to see them very often.
And I think I've got to agree with you in the fact that, you know, when you go fishing, we have a chance to see a lot of big fish throughout the course of 5 weeks. But when you're in the woods, you get one shot.
Oh yeah, you may not get one shot. You might be 3 years before you shoot the deer of a lifetime. You know,
Right.
see the big deer.
I haven't had an elk shot in 4 years. I'm getting a little perturbed.
We got a great water hole. I do water hole hunting for those, so you could just sit and you don't have to do all that mountain climbing that you like to do.
Yeah, beat my head against a rock. Tell me about your college years and when did you decide to come to Key West? Well, how did that become your path?
Well, I majored in journalism. I graduated from University of Florida in 1974, and there just wasn't any money to be made. I was like thinking I was going to be able to write all these magazine articles and work for a newspaper, but there just wasn't much money in it. I ended up getting a job as selling life insurance. My dad decided that's what I should be doing at that point. Help me out. And
I can't imagine you like that a whole lot.
oh my gosh, that didn't last very long. So 1975, I pulled up, moved down here. I had my Delmont 88, a 17 Mako, had my Chester drawers in the boat with all my clothes in it. And I had, I don't know, $1,000 or something saved up, and came down here, and I was going to be a fishing guide. And when I finally got a job, I had 76 cents in my pocket.
But you knew where you were headed.
I knew where I was headed, and it's been my road ever since. A real easy road.
It's interesting because Steve Huff says the same thing. When he got out of college, his mom asked him what he wanted to do. He said, I want to be a fishing guide. And she said, well, fishing guides are nothing more than a bunch of drunks, and they like to chase women. And Steve says, I can do that.
Well, that might be how it started. I don't know.
But you were in Key West. Well, you also, too, you made mention at lunch just a little bit ago about the Sportsman's Journal TV show and how that show itself really clicked into your being.
Sportsman Journal?
No, the American Sportsman.
American Sportsman, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they. I remember watching Bob Montgomery and Jonathan Winters on that show. I think Kurt Gowdy was the host, and they had gone to the Lucabac, which was a wreck that you had to take a time to run. It was nobody could find it, but only a chosen few that had the ability. And Bob Montgomery was one of them. And I watched him tease up amberjack and cobias and barracudas and catching 4 and 5 pound snappers, mangrove snappers. And I said, I got to go to Key West. This is just a place to be.
But you had a skiff. So how was that transition from the skiff boat to offshore light tackle stuff?
Well, I started out skiff fishing. I mean, and I had a 17 Mako, and I was able to go do light offshore stuff. The big trip back then was just to get to the Marquesas. I mean, that was a hike back then.
Right.
And we'd make it down there every once in a while, and the tarpon and permit fishing down there is epic. So, especially back then, it was untouched. So
right.
It's fantastic.
I can't imagine Key West in that generation too, because in the late '60s, that was when all the writers were down here. Tom McGuane, Jim Harrison, Hunter Thompson, and all those guys. And the movie Tarpon came out.
Yeah, I remember
So
that.
They were all here when you were here, right?
They were disbanding, I think, pretty much then, but they were here. But they weren't spending as much time down here.
Right.
I remember Jimmy Buffett had that little, I forgot what kind of boat it was, but it was the coolest flats boat on the planet. And those 16-foot, I think it was a Sidewinder or something like Hall. But, and then I remember the film. It wasn't even video back then. It was a
right.
film.
16
Tarpon.
millimeter, right? Tarpon.
Yeah. And I think I was telling you earlier, but when they were filming out of the airplane, there was just glare and you couldn't see nothing. And then all of a sudden the boat comes into view, and then this giant wad of tarpon over sand. There might have 100 fish, and you see him getting the cast off and actually hooking up a fish. I got chills right now thinking about it.
I mean, that was the only way you can get aerials out of a plane. Now you have the drones that do all that.
Right.
which is obviously so much better. But I too remember that movie Tarpon, and how the fish with the slow motion in the 16 millimeter film had such. Film and video are obviously two different things, and that alone had your eyeballs jumping out of your head to see the wrinkle of the water prior to that fish coming out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those early years were some of the earliest shots of big tarpon coming out of the water, and that was pretty compelling.
You'd never seen anything like that. I think we saw a little bit on American Sportsman. They did some stuff down in the Marquesas, but
right,
you didn't get to see that. You had to come and live it and experience it.
Right. What was Key West like back then?
It was kind of a hippie town, really. Just a lot of good friends. People knew everybody.
Kind of like a small ski town, but on the ocean.
Yeah. There was a couple hangouts in Chart Room and Full Moon Saloon. And you met there every day after you fished. Took your clients down with you. And sometimes you stayed there way longer than you wanted to.
Who were your compatriots back then? The guides that you were hanging with, and who were your, I would say, your peers?
Well, Ralph Delph was one of the people that got started with me down here. He started a little bit before me. Then back then it was Bob Montgomery was, he was, for some reason he liked me. He was grumpy to a lot of people, but for some reason he took me in. I think because I worked at the marina where he kept his boat, and I used to get him. He had an Evinrude, and that's what we had there. So I got him parts, and I would have every part that he needed for his motor in stock because I knew he needed to work it. And he'd come in. You kidding me? You got that? Yeah, we'll have it fixed today.
And you were asking, you got any spare numbers you can give me?
Yeah. Well, he actually gave me my first client, so that was pretty cool.
But so who started the wreck fishery that is so famous down here?
Well, Bob,
all those years.
Bob Montgomery was the first person that I knew that could find the wrecks. Then Pat Ford, he had a lot to do with it. He figured out the timetables that you needed to use to get to these wrecks. Like we would run from one buoy, to the next, to this other buoy and time it. And then that was 3.2 times the distance it was to the look-back. So you'd make a big loop back around, never change your speed. And then you would go by the marker again, do the multiplication. And then you would run that many minutes, 3.2 times the time it took you to get from marker to marker. And that was the time to get to the look-back, 003 degrees. We had compasses that cost $1,500. Mounted in big teak blocks so you could just stay on course.
It's got to be aggravating shortly after that once GPSs came into play and the numbers were easy to find, or the wrecks.
Well, then everybody had it. But there was a good 10 years, I would say, that we ran those wrecks without that. Maybe it was 8 years. But
did you ever fish off of any of the wrecks that produced gold, from the Spanish galleons? Like Mel Fishers and all that?
I don't know if I ever fished on that, but there was a lot of the guys that had, and they had the numbers to it. It looked like a big rock pile, and it was a pile of silver.
And then later, Fisher started pulling up the gold and found a bunch of sinkers on all that stuff.
Oh, fishing line tangled all in it.
Can you imagine?
Hooks. Oh,
not knowing what you're getting snagged on.
Yeah, I remember one trip I was going to a wreck, the tugboat, and it's it's a time run from the Marquesas. It's out in the sand, and barracudas mean there's something down there. If you see a lineup of barracudas, so
that's a telltale sign that there are game fish under these barracuda.
Yes, it's a telltale sign it's a wreck or some structure of some sort. So I'm in the middle of the sand, and I see all these cudas stacked up, and I stop. And I had back then I had a Texas Instrument Loran C, which was a single digit. It was, about as bad as one could get, I guess. But it did work a little bit. So I took the numbers down. I was going to go back and dive on it and see what was there. And it was a margarita. And about a month, 2 months later, a month and a half later, they were on it, and they had found it with because more of the sand had gotten off of it.
Right.
But I'd gone that route a million times, or I'd say a million, but and had never seen any kudas ever. And you'd probably pretty much run over the same spot. So I guess I lost part of my fortune there.
Have you always gravitated to the wreck fishing more so than the inshore stuff? I mean, initially you were a skiff fisherman. Do you miss that, or did you just like going into big water, catching bigger fish?
I like big water and catching the big fish. I mean, I like the flats fishing. I like the challenge of it. But, I did it for a long time, and I had a lot of clients, but I never could break into the already seasoned client, a guy that could cast and fish. I was the guy always teaching somebody something. And so
right.
It was very frustrating having people couldn't present casts, and they promised they would go home next year and practice, and
they
would
never
come
did.
back. Yeah, they still couldn't throw 15, 20 feet.
Tell me about your season here in Key West. What you fish for in the winter, what you fish for in the spring and summer.
Well, it started out just saying in the wintertime, we get all our pelagics show up. We have blackfin tunas, the sailfish, king mackerel, wahoo, amberjacks, all the snappers, yellowtail, muttons. So there's a great variety of fish. Cobias start to filter down. So it depends on where you're fishing too. The Atlantic is better for the tuna and the sailfish and that type of fish. And then the Gulf of Mexico is where you find the cobias that'll come to the surface, and amberjacks and the big mangroves.
And then in the spring and summer?
Springtime, we kind of delve into permits, start showing up on the deeper wrecks and stuff, and also on the flats. Then we get real good barracuda fishing. And then just lots of, the cobias come through the spring.
Right. So
Blackfins behind the shrimp boat, bonitas behind the shrimp boat.
We were talking about the shrimp boats earlier. I think the TV shows that you and I did for my show, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, we caught some tarpon, then we went out and caught some fish behind the shrimp boats. Tell me about how that evolved. How did you guys find the blackfin tuna, which was a byproduct of getting, all this bait off these boats?
Yeah, it was truly by accident. There's several people, I think, that kind of found it or figured it out at the same time. But it meant you had to give up your wreck run, because if you wanted to do shrimp boat trash, you had to run to a shrimp boat. So you would run to a shrimp boat and get your trash, then you would have to start back over. If you wanted to go to wreck, you'd have to go all the way back to the Northwest Channel and start your run to the wrecks. So nobody really fished behind shrimp boats much. But then all of a sudden, the shrimp boats came a little bit further to the east. And like one day I got into them real good, or first found them was with Joan Garista, who is now Joe Vernon. But we were fishing on the Sturtevant, and there was a shrimp boat close by. So I was able to run over to the shrimp boat. And as we were getting the trash, she dropped the basket of trash in the water. And we looked down, and it was solid blackfin tuna. And I think we caught we got a Met record on fly and a Met record on plug that day. And I think we won the Met tournament for blackfins on all those light tackle categories.
So that became a new fishery for you.
Then you just
fishing behind the boats.
Yep, fish behind the boat. So you just take off and go hit the shrimp boats.
Now, how many boats are out there? I mean, does it ever get crowded with competition fishing behind these boats?
Now it gets pretty crowded, yeah. And they're younger guys getting up earlier and getting to the boats before I do. So, but there could be 20 boats running out there now. And back then, there was just a handful.
There's nobody out there.
Hey, come on.
What? So it can get crowded out there then.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like a tarpon flat.
Right.
You got to get there early and hold your spot.
Yeah, you jump from boat to boat, and a lot of us work together. So if we get a boat that has a lot of tunas on it, we'll call somebody else over
and work it.
Yeah, and now they put the limits on the tunas, so it's much better because it's 2 per boat or 2 per person, And there was you could unlimited amount. People would keep 30 tunas. And
So do they do a lot of catch and release, or you catch your two and leave?
we do catch and release.
Right.
I mean, it's fun catching them. So
Right.
and the whole situation of having them so visual. I mean, basically, you can drop anything in the water and they'll eat it once they're chummed up.
Now, those tournaments went away. How did your fishing change? Because obviously you were a big world record chaser. You've been inducted into the Captain and Crew Hall of Fame from the IGFA this last fall, and you have a Lifetime Achievement Award. Your resume is very long and deep with all these records in the fishing that you've done with how many years now? Since the early 70s.
Yes, I think it's 45 years.
Right.
44 years of chartering. So.
What was the greatest window of that period of time?
I would say during the Met tournaments and the Rod and Reel Club was together, because those people were the ones that were booking us, and they were going for their club fish, and then they were fishing in the Met tournament. So they were using light tackle, which helped me develop into a better light tackle fisherman.
Right.
And so we'd go out, and every once in a while you'd catch a world record. You just, and then you started thinking, well, if I could do that, let's do this. And we'd use lighter tackle and go after different species of fish. One of the big things about that record fishing is having enough fish there to know that if you lose one, it's not the end of the day. You can just re-rig and hook another fish. So probably that's why I like the wreck fishing so much, because you could duplicate what you were doing many times. Even if you messed up, you could still catch or have another fish to catch.
You had a bunch of mulligans available.
Yeah, perfect analogy, yeah.
What do you if you take a look at the spectrum that you've done, now you have your hunting that you can leave all this and get a breath of fresh air from. I think one of the things that most people outside of Key West, when they think of light tackle fishing, I think they think of you, Ralph Delph, and Jose. Can you speak a little bit about each of these others?
Yeah, definitely. Ralph was a pioneer down here too. I mean, he started off a little bit before I did, but he'd fished down in the Keys and Key West for his whole life. So he had like a real understanding of the place. And he just started guiding out of a 20-foot sea craft and brought in some phenomenal catches. I mean, and he had the same angling group to work from that I did, which was, the Miami Met or fishermen, and then the Rod and Reel Club fishermen. And Ralph, I remember he caught a 103-pound amberjack, and it was a 14-foot of water, or shallow wreck, which I couldn't believe it. But it was a wreck that these amberjack came to, and right in the middle of the quicksands.
I remember Steve Huff said that Ralph Delph could catch a blue marlin out of a mud puddle.
Well, he actually caught a swordfish at Flamingo. So,
caught a swordfish where?
In Flamingo.
Ralph did?
Yeah. Back in the days, yeah.
But was he targeting a swordfish, or was this a
just
byproduct
right
of tarpon fishing?
Byproduct of tarpon fishing.
Oh, that's very interesting. But you guys used to live together, right?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was good. His sons, Robbie and Mike, both lived with us. And they were real young back then. But I learned a lot. You talking fishing, that's all we did was like a fish camp. We lived in a trailer over in Tamarack Park. So
right.
We would talk about our days fishing and, learn from each other. We had quite a rivalry going. I mean, as far as competitive fish, seems every time I caught a really good fish in the Met or something, the next day he was after it or he'd catch it. So, but it made me a better fisherman.
Right. And that's typical of any sports legends and rivals in sports. They drive each other to a higher level.
It definitely was that. Definitely.
How many records did he retire with?
I've never heard a solid figure. I know he had over 200.
And you're 239.
239.
Is there a certain goal you're looking for? A certain number?
Well, I'm running out of anglers to do it. We're not, like we were talking earlier, the IGFA angler that's going and doing it, as a passion.
Right.
Is just not that many around anymore. And I think like I said, the Met tournament and the fishing clubs actually drove people into wanting more world records. So that's when the majority of mine were caught were during that period of time.
You're right. Tell me about Jose.
Jose was energetic, up and coming. Came from Isla Brada. I think he was Stu App had kind of protegeed him up there on the flats and stuff like that. Or not protegeed him, but mentored him. And Jose was very, very active fisherman. He'd go anywhere, run the furthest distances, and whatever you had to do to catch fish.
So he was
a great guy,
a great fisherman as well as a great person.
He was a great person, great fisherman, and always was a good friend of ours, mine.
What any stories about fishing next to Jose out there?
Well,
the good, the bad, or the ugly, whatever it might be.
No, we when we had the yellowfin tunas down there, it was an interesting story. We'd get up. I'd get up real early and get my bait and get out there, and I'd get maybe an hour to myself before the other boats could get there with their bait. And so Jose, I'd get out there and I get the fish. I got crazy about trying to get a big yellowfin on fly, so I'd get out there early, and you could almost train the fish if you'd get them up and then start feeding them one pilchard at a time, and you'd get a big one come one through, and then the next one would come through, and the next one, and I'd see about almost every time I'd start getting them in the rank and file, getting them ready to be able to throw the fly at them. Here comes Jose, and he'd throw a couple netfuls of bait in the water, and then the fish were everywhere, and then you just went to, catch them on general or something.
Right.
Like that.
But you could actually get these yellowfin kind of like feeding off of a conveyor belt, if you will, feeding one piece of bait at a time.
Yep. We just slow the chumming down, and then they would find it. The current would be taking them away in a certain spot every time, and the fish, you'd just see them turning and spinning and coming back. And you could actually you could really pick one if you wanted.
Interesting. Talk about your fishery and how you do this whole thing with pilchards is your bait fish of choice, right?
Yes,
for the most part.
It's been that for a long, long time. You could go out and troll and all that, and you're going to catch, on a great day, 10% of what I'm going to catch with pilchards. It's just that much better, and it's worth the time. We'll spend sometimes, the first thing we do in the morning is go catch bait, and you can't really keep it overnight or whatever. And sometimes when it's cold or it's windy, it's a lot harder to get. We've spent till noon, even 1 o'clock getting bait.
Before you even head offshore.
Before you even start fishing.
How aggravating is that?
It can get aggravating. If you have somebody, the people that have done it before, they know to wait. They say, that's okay. I know we need them. We're good. And then you'll go have 3 hours of the best fishing you ever had.
Right.
But so that's our first thing we do is we catch bait. Usually we have bait by 10 o'clock. That's kind of the goal, is get out of there by 10.
I asked your son the other day, I said, what's the greatest tip your father gave you? And he said, Dad told me always to get more bait than you think you might need.
He with the most bait.
If you run out of bait, you're done.
That's right.
Right.
He with the most bait wins. So
catching more fish.
You catch more fish. You can chum harder and fish harder.
I'll tell you an interesting Jose story for us.
Sure.
I knew Jose not real well. We were both with Hell's Bay for a period of time, so we'd be at the booth at the trade shows. And remember the show he did on Spanish Fly where he couldn't get to the bait, and he took the cooler off the boat and he waded inshore with his cast net and his cooler, got the bait, filled it up his cooler, and took it back to the boat, went offshore and caught a bunch of fish. Do you remember that show by chance?
Yeah, I think he actually, that was in the Bahamas.
Somewhere else, yeah.
Yeah, it was in the Bahamas. They were catching mutton snappers.
Right. So Nikki and I, we were down here tarpon fishing probably about 5 years ago. Nikki, maybe 5, maybe a few more than that. We were at Baby's Coffee getting some coffee and chasing chickens early in the morning. So we're getting and it's raining and it's overcast. It's nasty. And I look over to the bay side and I see all this mullet mud. And the bell goes off in my head. Jose and his show netting the bait and the cooler. I said, Nikki, today is dedicated to Jose. He said, what are you talking about, Dad? And I said, see all that mullet mud? We're going to take the cooler out of the boat. We're going to wade over there, net the mullet, throw it in the cooler, put the bait in the boat. We're going to go down and catch a couple tarpon. And it was almost like too overwhelming for him to like think that this is actually going to be a possibility.
This is going to work.
Right? So we get out there. He knows how bad I am at throwing a cast net. So it takes us a little while to get up near the mullet, in the bay. And now it's, the mud has sucked our sandals off and the coral's hurting our feet. We finally get out there, and little Nicky's about this tall, and he's got this big, cooler over his eyeballs. I'm getting ready to throw my cast net because the mullet are right there. And Nicky goes, "Don't fuck it up." Well, luckily I got a good throw, and we got a bunch of bait. We threw it in the cooler, and we went into and I don't know, we hooked 7 or 8 tarpon that day, but that day was dedicated to Jose from that TV show. And, just a big wraparound about Jose and what he brought to the game. I mean,
his show brought a lot of people into fishing, and he was so generous with his foundations, and, he was a great guy.
Yeah. I mean, you grow up in a great era down here. Do you get a little bit aggravated with where it is today, maybe with the popularity of everything and all the boats and the people that are fishing? Is it too crowded offshore? I mean, inshore obviously is very tight.
Yeah, it's crowded, and but everybody down here seems to work real good together. I mean, we all know to anchor stern to stern, and don't drop the anchor, and the other guy's behind his transom, and
right.
There's a lot of etiquette that goes on. It's the guys that come down that don't know the etiquette or what you're trying to do, and they troll behind you, but if you're fishing, say we're fishing on the submarine wreck, that's a public place, so you can't get mad if somebody wants to come in there and do all that.
Right. How many spots do you have out there in your book?
I've never counted them, but I would say we have 1,000.
Are you finding new spots every year?
All the time.
Are you?
Yeah.
And how do you find a new spot?
When we go to an old spot, so we're fishing a coral head or a part of a reef, but mainly like if you're fishing on a ridge or whatever, you just leave that and mill around, take a little time in that area, and you go up to a mile away from it, and then you'll mark another spot
on your transducer.
Yeah,
on the screen,
depth sounder, and then when you get that, you got the GPS. You can put it on there.
What has made you as good as you are?
I think I'm a very I don't know what I want to say. I'm very, very persistent at things, and I don't like to not have the day become good. I mean, or whatever. So I'm like very persistent at it. I'll stay later than anybody. I usually go earlier than everybody, and I'll run farther than everybody.
You're a driven man. I'm
driven to catch fish, yes. And hunting the same way. It's like
right. It's interesting because you're like that duck on water. You're smooth on the surface, but underwater you're kicking, feverishly.
That makes sense.
Yeah. What's the biggest tournament that you've won that you're most proud of? Because you did a lot of offshore stuff, right?
Yeah, we've done a lot of
big money tournaments.
Yeah, we won. Came in second in the Key West Marlin tournament, which was a big money day. And
how much was that?
Back in the day, is almost $100,000. Now the tournaments are not to get that much in a sailfish in a daily, but this was back when it was a big deal.
Right.
All the boats, 80 boats in it.
Do they still have that tournament?
No, well, it's now the Hemingway tournament.
Right.
So it's a fractured piece of it.
Right.
And it's not near as big. And then they had this one tournament that we won 4 times was it was a light tackle tournament, and went along with Hemingway Days or whatever, but it was sailfish. You had to catch a sailfish, a tarpon, and a permit. And you had to do a 12-pound test, and you had to catch each one. So in other words, you catch a sailfish, you couldn't catch another sailfish till you caught your tarpon and your permit.
Right.
And then you could start over whatever order you wanted.
Right.
And so that was a great tournament. We had so much fun. It was a lot of running involved, but
you're offshore, then you're coral heads, and then you're looking for. What time of year was that tournament?
That was in April.
Yeah. And you won that 4 times?
We won it 4, I think to 7 times.
Wow.
It was on. And
I mean, that's pretty good dexterity to have.
Yeah, it was a blast. I mean, I remember one by 10 o'clock in the morning, we had tarpon, a permit, 2 sailfish, and a permit by 10 in the morning. And people were just freaked.
You want it going away?
Well, they
caught
you.
you.
Sometimes you get stuck again. Then it's like
Right.
I remember we were fighting. We needed to get the permit, and we had him on. And when we had hooked, this fish was like, when we got it, was like 42 pounds or something. We weighed on the Chatillon scale, but
monster.
We had to fight it for 2 hours on 12-pound test.
Wow.
So we were killing our day. It's like, but we had to get the permit. All we knew there was more permit, but we decided one in the hand is better than all the ones in the bush.
Right, I hear you there.
So.
Are you still tournament fishing at all?
We do occasional dolphin tournament, and I host a fly fishing tournament in Bermuda, which is an invitational tournament, which is really cool.
Every year?
Every year, yeah.
And what's the targeted species up there?
We do yellowfin tuna, blackfin tunas, and wahoos. All on fly.
Tell me about your tuna fishing up there and elsewhere.
In Bermuda?
Just in general, but in Bermuda too.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Just talk about the fish itself, because I've caught yellowfins. I've never caught a bluefin, but tuna fishing is it's an interesting animal.
They are bad to bone. I mean, they're. I've gone up to Massachusetts a couple times, and my best was an 860. It took 7 hours to land. We hooked it at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and fought it till midnight.
With how much drag?
We had up over 60 pounds of drag, really.
Oh my God!
Yeah, on a pin 80 wide, standing up. And
what kind of war was that?
It was a war. You stumble when he runs. You wasn't worried about getting pulled over too much, but you could have went in pretty easy.
Right.
And I remember my thighs were all black and blue, and I went out the next day and bought a set of knee pads, basketball knee pads, to put underneath the rod belt. So make it a little more enjoyable if I had to do that again.
You probably didn't want to do that again for another year.
Well, yeah. No, we went back out, caught one 3 days later, I think, 680 or something. But that was an angling achievement of mine that I really have been proud of for a long time.
That's a big fish.
There wasn't much people catching fish on stand-up back then, and that was.
Is that a lost art?
I just think people don't want to go through the pain of fighting them that way. That you see all the shows they're using the rod holders, and the rod holders actually spin.
Sure. And so it took 2 guys from Key West to go up and teach those guys how to fight big fish.
Well,
a man, you and Ralph Delph.
Yeah, Ralph used to do that too.
Right.
I think he might have caught one over 1,000. So,
is there any advantage to doing that in any way? Stand up, fighting big fish?
No, I don't think there's too much of an advantage, really. I mean, you're a little more mobile. You can get around the boat.
Right.
But with that kind of drag, you're not real mobile. You're just hanging on, really.
Right.
With a good harness, though, it's very doable. I mean, my back really didn't hurt that bad from fighting that fish. It was pretty much my legs were tired and the bruised thighs.
Right. But I know that the skiff fishing, that was one of the reasons why you gravitated to offshore stuff was your back, right?
Yeah.
Have you always had a bad back? Or
yeah, I've had a bad back.
That gave you a bad back?
No, we've had it in the family, but I was yanking a bag of shrimp boat trash out of my freezer, and I got mad at it because it was stuck and I finally got it loose, and I gave it a good twist as I threw it out, and that I felt something very just go pop. Pop-ish. And I said, oh, okay. And then 3 days later, I couldn't walk. So,
did you ever have any surgeries in your back?
No, I found a great sports doctor, and he prescribed steroids. And every time I haven't had them for 5 years, but if I do go bad, they give me a Z pack of steroids, and it straightens everything up, lets the muscles align. And
do you have a refrigerator full of those?
You're not supposed to take them more than once a year. Now I know why. I know why athletes love steroids. You feel like you're 14 years old again.
Tell me about Nick Stanzik and catching big swordfish during the daytime. Has that technique gravitated down here? Are you guys doing that at all?
Yep, we're doing a little bit. My son does a lot of it. Chris is really good at it. Stanzik's just the man. I mean, there's nobody can even touch him. He's doing it every
What makes
day.
him so good at that? I mean, is it?
He specializes in it, and I think is his big thing.
Right.
That's what he does the most. I mean, he can sailfish with the best of them and do all that too, but he really likes to do it. So he stands out amongst anybody with that.
Right. But do you guys do a fair amount of that down here?
We do a fair amount of it, yes. Especially the summertime, we'll go out and we'll carry the big stick, the electric rod, and we'll dolphin fish in the morning, trolling, and sometime during the day when it gets, slower at dolphin fishing, we'll stop. You're usually near deep water then, and you can make a couple drops.
So so you're looking for a canyon, or how deep of water, and how do you actually do that?
There's all kinds of things that they like. There's the edge of the continental shelf, which it's tough to fish because you get hung up a lot on it. But just outside of that, there's softer bottom sometimes is good because it has mud and all the nutrients are in it, and the squid like to school up there. So, and then there's hard bottoms, pieces of hard bottom where the fish like to lay on. And they go right to the bottom, and they'll actually, they say that they stand on their fins and the water lets the current bring stuff to them. The Gulf Stream
They're
current.
just sitting in an easy chair.
They sit in an easy chair.
And they feed, or it's just it's all speculative.
It's all speculation, but
of course.
I've talked to some real good fishermen. That's one of the theories is they'll just lay down there, and then they feed down deep too. Yes,
right.
They've got that giant eyeball, and one of the crazy things about swordfish is, when you're doing the deep dropping, you're fishing in 1,800 feet of water, so you're basically bottom fishing in that deep of water.
Wow.
So when you get a fish on, it's just a tiny tap. You just see the rod tip just deep, or something different. It lightens up a little bit. Doesn't have all the weight on it.
I can only imagine how many bites you've missed.
You see him. It's amazing. You get pretty good at it, yeah. And then you hook the fish up, and so they just kind of come up. You don't have any idea how big he is. He could be a 10-pounder, or he could be 800 pounds. And then all of a sudden, he gets up through the thermocline and starts to warm up. And
so the thermocline is the layer of warmer water.
Yes.
So when it's really cold in the deep 1,700-foot water.
I don't know what the temperature is down there, but I'm betting it's in the 50s, probably 60s. But yeah, then they get real lethargic, and that's why swordfish, they come to the surface in sun sometimes, and they take in a lot of the light through their eyeballs, and that eyeball's huge, so they could see in very limited spaces. But
right.
But when they come through that thermocline, all of a sudden you got your hands full. And there was a great Facebook, I forgot the captain that had it, but they had gaffed one green, a 300-pounder, and I had never seen a fish. I don't know how those mates held on to that thing. They're lucky they didn't get killed.
Right.
That sword going around.
Have you ever had any very, real dangerous calls gaffing fish?
Well, yeah. We used to keep the big bull sharks for the Met tournament, and I remember straight gaffing a 400-pounder, and I fell right on top of him. He pulled me right into water on top of him.
Wow.
So I don't think I got wet. I got out of water pretty quick, but left the gaff with him.
Right. What about gaffing big tarpon? Some of our guests have been speaking about, the excitement of, record fishing for big tarpon. Have you ever gaffed a big tarpon?
I have. I had several records, and I at one point had the women's 12-pound record, which was 148, I believe.
On
12-pound test.
That's all tackle.
Yeah, we spinning, right. Yeah, all tackle. And then we had the men's record was 178. And
you gaffed both those fish.
I guess we gaffed those fish. I've killed a few.
Right.
Gaffing a tarpon is a whole set of things and a whole hard thing to do anyway.
Right.
Because the scales come off, so you really got to get ahead of them just a little bit so you can angle into the scales.
Right.
Is the best way to do it. So.
Right.
But it's hard to get ahead of a tarpon on light tackle. So.
Yeah. What about? Tell me about your fly fishing. a favorite? I know you're one of your favorite spots over there on the east side of the mainland. I'm not going to mention any names, but you've caught fish close to 2, if not over 200 pounds on fly.
I had a 200 length and girth one that was 208, and that was back in 25 years ago or something like that.
Right.
Just when the tarpon tags had come out. I didn't have a tarpon tag, or I would have brought the fish in. But
right.
It's a pretty cool story. My buddy Nick Malinowski made me a fly stretcher for Christmas, and he made 12 flies and tied them up IGFA legal, 20-pound tippets. And so I said, hey, let's try this fly. And I pull this red and white whistler out, and I'm over at right at the mouth of Calder Channel, and put it on. Second cast, I hook up, boom, and this big giant fish jumps. I got him on. Yeah, all right. He runs around the Calder marker and comes straight back at us. And I just free spool. I don't know how he didn't cut us off. It's an iron marker. And we ran around it, got to the other side, and fought her for 45 minutes. And I remember we fought the fish probably 30 minutes just at an action craft, and I had the guy that was with me was turning the wheel but not putting in gear. So when the fish would surge to the right, we'd just let her pull the boat right, surge to the left. I'm sure you've done that. And finally wore it down, and we were able to get in the water with it. And I said, dang, I don't have a tag. I know this fish is really pushing 200. And so I had some monofilament. We measured the fish real carefully, took the length, and then took the girth. And then I spent over an hour trying to revive that fish. I mean, I walked it and did everything I possibly could, and I was pretty sure it was going to die. So then I decided, you know what? I went back to the dock. We were home, and I got my buddy Greg's shirts, and I said, we're going to go back and find that fish, because I let it loose on the side of a flat. So when I went back it took us 30 minutes, but I found the channel, and there's this flash of silver in the spotlight, and we go over there, and the sharks had eaten them. Oh, the whole thing is terrible, but it was shows you what happens. I mean,
stuff happens out there.
Stuff happens out there.
Funny story for the people that are watching. Every year during a worm hatch, RT fishes on the outside of the certain basin. We fish on the inside, and when the worms start to go off, we go on the outside, maybe run down to Key West. Sometimes you stay at the mouth of we go down, or vice versa. You'll be down there, and it's really a great way to do intel. I'm going to go that way. You call me if they come off here. So one time the worms are about ready to go off at the mouth, and you're sticking around. I said, I'm going to head to Key West. I'll call you if they go off. So I'm running down with my son down towards Key West, and I see off to the left the big explosion, and it's out by a marker out there, and the fish were coming in and eating worms. And I called RT. I said, RT, I'm halfway down to Key West, offshore. And Nikki and I are hooking all these fish. And pretty soon I see you run by right down to Key West. You didn't even stop. And I called RT that night. I said, hey, RT, did you see us out there hooked up? He said, I saw you out there. And I said, how come you didn't come out? And what'd you say? You're fishing in a no fishing zone.
You were fishing it.
It was the sanctuary.
The sanctuary.
Take a guess where we were fishing the next night. At the sanctuary.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I figured since you were Andy Mill, you had permission to go in
pull.
there. So.
Yeah, I get it.
Pull.
Instead of handcuffing me with my hands behind me, they'd be in front of me.
Yeah. The king of tarpon.
Yeah, right. Tell me about your travels around the world and the best fish that you were possibly mentioning that you've ever caught before. Well,
one of the real good stories is going to Australia. We went on a 3-week mothership trip out to a place called Willis Island, which was a hike from Cairns. It was 295 miles. I think it was east of Cairns. I'm getting older. I forget things. But anyway, we get out there, and first day we're fishing. It was an afternoon. It was like we got there, and everybody was anxious to go fishing. And I went. A friend of mine had taken me along I called him as his rod maul. I brought all the tackle, and I got to go on this trip of a lifetime. I couldn't afford it. So he catches a fish, and his son catches a fish, and somebody else was on the boat, and he caught a fish. And then we're trolling along, and bam, the rod goes down. Well, to tell the story a little bit, I got a little ahead of myself. As a kid, I'd always wanted to catch a dogtooth tuna. I mean, I saw it in Field and Stream, pictures of them, I think off of Vietnam or something they caught them. And it was just a fish that I had really dreamed about catching. Well, now I'm 50 some years old and I've never caught one. And that was what I hooked, was a dogtooth tuna. But it was 163.5 pounds, which was the 30-pound IGFA world record at the time. So catch your fish of a lifetime, your first one, and it was an IGFA record, line class record, was pretty cool.
Yeah. What was that fight like?
They make a tremendous first run. I mean, it's unbelievable burning. And then they kind of circle back, they'll make another run, and then they have an air bladder. So once you get them at about 60 feet or so, they kind of just boom, blow up and pinwheel to the top.
So it's
not much at the end.
Yeah.
And
short and vicious.
Short and vicious.
Yeah.
And we got to fish them on fly, and Hal Chittum had put the trip together, and he had gone the year before, and I think he caught them up to 140 pounds on fly rods, and we got them. I got one to 80. We caught quite a few in the 40 and 50 pound range.
Well, you've got such great fishing around here. I can't imagine you've got a desire to travel very far to catch fish. And if you do, what would that fish be, and where would you want to go?
Right now, probably in the Amazon or something, catch a Dorado. That seems to intrigue me.
Right.
A pariah, those fish with the big giant teeth that go down into the bottom jaw.
Right.
Something weird like that would be where I'd be going.
Who did you we always have to ask, our guests, who inspired them? Because we've all been inspired by somebody or something. Did you have somebody that really inspired you along the way, that motivated you, that you wanted to simulate your life to?
I think when I got down here, mainly Bob Montgomery, who was the guide in Key West. I just loved how he fished, what he did. He did the inshore and offshore. He was a great flats guide, and he was also a great offshore fisherman. And I think that inspired me along the way. When I was younger, I just fished. I joined a fishing club in Cocoa, Florida, and you just grew up learning from other club members how to fish.
Sure.
We all grew together.
Right.
And then when I came to the Keys, it was a whole learning experience. I think for myself, again, it was really not totally different fish, but a lot of different types of different fish than I was used to catching. And I think Bob inspired me because you could see that you could catch them on a fly rod, or you could catch them on 8-pound test line, or
right.
You could catch them different ways and have fun doing that too.
Right. Well, obviously you've been a big inspiration to a lot of people with what you've done down here. And, it's hard to think what kind of impact am I having on younger fishermen, the younger generation. What would you like to be? How would you like to inspire this new generation in any way? If there is a specific way you would like to have that inspiration be?
The conservation is fantastic. This kill everything that you catch is, no longer works, I don't think. And I think most of the guys that I've mentored along have gotten to that point. Chris, my son, is an unbelievable fisherman. He's me, and then he adds a ton of his young and new thoughts on how to do things, which is really great to see.
Is he as good as you?
No, not yet.
But he's pushing you.
He's pushing the old man. Yeah, definitely.
Well, you're talking about conservation, and that raises an interesting question, because I know wherever you go in the Keys, the sharks and the reef issues. You go up to Isla Morada, they talk about the hump. You can't get fish in. You go up to Jupiter, Florida, they talk about the sharks up there. Is there anything that we can do? Because obviously a lot of the fish that we want to catch are on these reefs, and a lot of these fish are getting bit by sharks.
And they're And now
there's a big question and a big maybe controversy, if I may throw that out there, with Western dry rocks and
Right.
about the permit. A lot of guys are fishing for these permit when they're spawning out there and they're getting nipped by sharks.
Right.
Do you think by chance, just throwing it out there, that should be shut down while these permit are spawning by chance?
I don't. I mean, there's fish have been coming there for as many years as I've been here. I mean, for thousands of years. And it's the same school of fish. It's the same size. The sharks are eating them whether you're catching them or not. They're a little more vulnerable when they get caught.
Right.
But most of the guides now, if they see a shark shows up, they quit fishing them and they'll
Right.
leave it.
Right.
And, it's just one of our best spots to fish because
They're always there.
well, not only that, the other fish that we catch, there's yellowtail snapper and mutton snapper in this area. It's just one of those spots that's, it's a go-to spot. So I understand the position of what people feel and, how the permit they're feeling they're getting eaten, but it's the same thing. You hook a fish at Bay of Honda, a tarpon.
That was the next question I was going to ask.
They're getting eaten. Key West Harbor.
Do you think that those locations might be or should be shut down? Maybe
I don't-
like during the worm hatch when all those fish are in there eating worms and you got 70 boats running around on top of their heads.
I don't think so. I think fish, it's a public thing, but fishing's for everybody. So I don't want to see that. I think there should be some measures to thin the sharks back out. I mean, when long lining was around, we didn't have this problem. Until 6 years ago, we hadn't had a shark problem in Key West other than a few hammerheads showing up. Now it's packs of bull sharks on the tarpon schools, and in the Gulf you catch one snapper and the sharks are there, and they're eating all these fish that aren't hooked too. I mean, they've got to eat something,
Right.
and so they're eating a ton of fish because there's more of them. They're taking more of the stock away, so to speak.
Is there any way to, harvest some of these sharks in any legal way that it would be palatable to the public's eye?
I don't know. The public, just finning a shark is not the answer. I mean,
Right.
Sharks are good to eat. I mean, you can eat blacktip sharks. People eat lemon sharks. They have, they do have food value.
Right.
And so I think if you took them and didn't just fin them and throw the carcass in the water,
Yeah.
it'd be better for the public eye.
Yeah.
It's a tricky road.
Yeah, for sure. Where do you foresee this sport in 10, 15, 20 years? Fishing in general down here in Key West.
I think it's going to be more businesses a charter boat, a guy owning several boats. I mean, that's already starting on the flat scene. So the whole business, guy has 10 boats, and
So you have one boat owner, one guide, but he
Right.
owns 10 boats. And
Right.
so he takes a commission from all the other
All the
guides
other-
that
yeah.
are running their boats.
that are running their boats.
Right.
That's starting to happen. I think it's with all the licensing and stuff, and that's what the real thing is. I just don't want a closure
Right.
like at Western Dry Rocks. The closures, once they get that, then they want
More.
more.
Right.
And there's other ways to go about.
Is there any way
Yeah.
to regulate the numbers? Because you're a hunter, and we've seen this is a question I've raised before. Do you ever foresee a system in the Keys with the fishing game where you have to apply for a tag to come fish in Florida, just like we have to apply for a tag to go elk hunt in Montana,
I don't.
Colorado?
In fact, I don't see that because the industry is so big. It's billions of dollars in the state of Florida. I mean, we charge. They charge for a license, and that's as far as I think that probably will go. There was talk though of selling fish stocks to recreational anglers in the Gulf of Mexico, like they've done for the commercial.
Right.
So you would go pay $30 for a pound of red snapper, and it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I mean, it's like instead of having limits, then there would only be certain people who would get the fish for them. So
Right.
there's some crazy stuff people think up.
Right. You like it just the way it is.
I like the way it was.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I mean, as far as we had cobias as far as the eye could see. I mean, you go to some of these wrecks, you could catch 30, 40 cobia in a day. And I just couldn't let people keep them. They would want to take 10.
All of them.
Yeah, they want them all back. Now, I had a self-imposed limit on the boat of 2 fish per person
Right.
back in 1978.
So you were cutting edge with conservation
Trying to be,
back
yeah.
then.
But it just, what are you going to do with 300 pounds of cobia? 'Cause
Right.
They were up back then, we were
Right.
average 30, 40-pound fish.
Give me a day in the life of RT Trosset back in 1975
Whew.
or 1980. And a night of RT Trosset's evening experiences.
Well, we'd always get up to go fish. We never missed that.
Even though it might have been painful.
Yeah, well, I was late a few days. My excuse for that was, they can't follow us if we're the last ones to go. So. But no, we'd get up, early morning always, and go get our bait, do our fishing.
Was the bait easy to get back then?
Yes, there wasn't near as much competition.
Right.
People first didn't know about it, and then there just wasn't as many guides getting it.
Right.
We come back in, clean our fish, have a few beers, and roll down to the Full Moon Saloon or the chart room, and take your customers with you.
Right.
They were buying.
You needed to eat,
Yeah.
of course, and drink.
Yeah, we get.
Well, what would you see out on the ocean back 40 years ago? I mean, we can only imagine. I mean, I was down here 35 years ago, and I could, I remember the fishing. It was really good, but I don't remember the tarpon fishing being like we were seeing thousands a day. Were you seeing that kind of prolific fishing offshore?
I'd see it. Yeah, offshore when it would migrate, we'd see a lot more migrating fish. I haven't seen them for a few years now, but you'd see the big schools coming across, and then the Marquesas would invariably have giant wads of fish back in the 70s and 80s, late 70s.
Would you get tired of catching them? Because obviously they ate so well.
No, they didn't always eat so well,
No.
but you see schools of 1,000 fish, and you couldn't bump them. I mean, you could pull up to them with your motor on, and just
They didn't mind.
they didn't mind. They weren't spooky at all. Now, you just even turn your trolling motor on,
Yeah.
and they're turning right or left.
Have to pull in from a mile away.
Yeah, but after this COVID thing, it was like going back to that time.
You saw fish happy again, and
The fish are happy, and they're eating way better than you don't have to feed them as daintily as I've watched you make presentations that are amazing, but they'll take the fly on a short strip now, and I don't know. It's just it's been wonderful, and the guides have all got a treat to be able to see that, because
Right.
all these younger guys had never seen the happy fish like that, and
we're never going to see that again.
all of them are talking about it. I mean, if you talk to any guide on the dock, young guy, God, I can't believe it. This must have been back in the old days. How was it, old man? Then asked me the question.
It's just like how you saw it.
Just how you saw it. Yeah.
What are you most proud of? I mean, you've had a very prolific, successful career. A Lifetime Achievement Award, the Hall of Fame induction to the captains and crew.
Those were big points in my life. I really was honored to be given those awards. I mean, and the great one was the Legendary Captain's Award. Is that's by your peers. It's
For
not
sure.
It's not just picked by a panel of people or by an accomplishment. It's for a lifetime of achievement. So
Right.
I was most proud of that. But really, I think my kids. I mean, both of them are in. My oldest son Robert is a diver, and he's got a very successful dive business. And Chris is, as I said before, a great offshore fisherman, can fish the flats, can do anything. And I'm just proud and happy that they followed in doing something that they wanted to do. And they're going to be very successful at it because they're doing what they like to do. And I think that's the key to having a good life. That's, I've been doing it 44 years, and I ain't quitting.
And they're your best friends.
Yeah, and they're my best friends.
That's
Yeah.
so cool. Well, RT, I've known you for a long time. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And like I said before, you've inspired so many people. And I just have to say on behalf of everybody and my son and I, having you as a friend is a true honor and a pleasure.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be on your TV show here. So I appreciate it, man.
All right. RT, you're the man. Thank you, bud.
Thank you, buddy.
When I saw its West Side Story.